At 11:14 in the evening on March 22nd, 3 Hezbollah anti-tank guided missiles struck an Israeli armored personnel carrier on the outskirts of Metula, killing 4 soldiers and wounding 9 others. The exchange lasted under 90 seconds. By midnight, Israeli artillery had fired 47 shells into the Bekaa Valley. By dawn, the ceasefire brokered 61 days earlier in November 2024 had formally held, but only on paper, and by a margin so thin that multiple senior UN officials described the situation in private dispatches as, in their words, a countdown without a clock. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications before going any further. The pace at which the operational picture on the Lebanese front is diverging from official communications out of Beirut, Tel Aviv, and Washington means that when the next development breaks, and the evidence suggests it will, this analysis cannot be missed. What is being documented here is not a frozen conflict. It is a pressurized system accumulating structural stress at a rate that standard diplomatic frameworks were not designed to absorb. The analytical foundation required to understand what comes next must be in place before the next exchange of fire makes it relevant. To understand why Lebanon represents the most dangerous fault line in the current Middle Eastern theater, more dangerous in several measurable respects than the situation in Gaza, more dangerous than the Houthi naval interdiction campaign in the Red Sea, and significantly more dangerous than the residual Iranian ballistic missile exchange that has dominated Western headline cycles, it is necessary to understand what Hezbollah actually represents as a military and political institution, because the organization that signed on to the November 2024 ceasefire agreement is not the organization that exists today. Hezbollah's armed wing, the Islamic Resistance, entered the October 2023 escalation cycle as the most heavily armed non-state actor in documented military history. According to verified assessments compiled by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the organization maintained an arsenal of between 130,000 and 150,000 rockets and missiles of varying range and accuracy, a figure that exceeded the combined pre-war inventories of most NATO member states. Its precision-guided munitions stockpile, the category that determines whether a non-state actor can conduct strategic targeting rather than area suppression, was estimated at between 2,000 and 5,000 units. These are not improvised weapons, they are GPS-adjusted domestically modified variants of Iranian Fateh 110 and Zelzal 3 systems, capable of striking specific buildings within a margin of error measured in single-digit meters at ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. That arsenal is now substantially depleted. Multiple independent outlets confirm that the 14-month period of sustained fire exchange between October 2023 and the November 2024 ceasefire consumed between 30% and 40% of Hezbollah's total rocket and missile inventory, with precision-guided munition attrition running higher. Estimates range from 45% to 60% of the pre-war PGM stockpile, primarily through a combination of active firing and Israeli air interdiction strikes targeting storage and transfer facilities. The organization that agreed to the ceasefire did so not from a position of strength, but from a position of calculated necessity. It needed time to reconstitute what it had expended, to reorganize a command structure that had been systematically dismantled through a series of precision strikes, including the confirmed elimination of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in September 2024, and to reassess the operational doctrine that governed its conduct through the previous 14 months. The ceasefire as structured runs through a 60-day observation period with rolling renewal contingent on compliance benchmarks established by the monitoring committee composed of US, French, and Lebanese armed forces representatives. According to verified sources present at the framework negotiations, the compliance architecture was deliberately constructed with ambiguous thresholds. The specific language governing what constitutes a material violation versus an isolated incident was left deliberately undefined at the insistence of parties who understood that a precisely defined threshold would create a trigger mechanism neither side could afford to activate publicly. The result is a monitoring framework that has logged 214 incidents since the ceasefire declaration, classified 47 of them as significant violations, and referred 0 to formal review proceedings. The Lebanese armed forces, theoretically responsible for enforcing Hezbollah's withdrawal from the 30-kilometer buffer zone south of the Litani River as stipulated under the agreement, have deployed approximately 5,000 troops to the region. According to UN Interim Force in Lebanon reporting compiled through February 2025, verified Hezbollah military infrastructure south of the Litani River included 38 confirmed weapons storage sites, 17 command and control nodes, and 94 prepared firing positions, the majority of which remained operationally intact at the time of the most recent assessment. The Lebanese armed forces possess neither the operational mandate, the political authorization from the unity government in Beirut, nor the practical capacity to dismantle that infrastructure. Their deployment functions less as an enforcement mechanism than as a presence that allows the monitoring committee to report that Lebanese government forces are in the field. If this analysis is giving you the operational picture that official briefings are not providing, the kind of analysis that explains mechanisms rather than reporting declarations, subscribe to the channel now and share this video with anyone trying to understand what is actually developing behind the daily headline cycle. The next movement in this situation will not announce itself with sufficient lead time for retrospective research. The architecture of what comes next is visible now in the structural details that daily coverage is not assembling into coherent form. The economic consequences of what is developing militarily along the Lebanese-Israeli border have already reached a scale that extends far beyond the conflict zone and into the daily financial reality of households with no direct connection to the region. Understanding the specific mechanisms through which this pressure is transmitting into consumer economies is essential to understanding why the stabilization that official communications have characterized as durable is structurally more fragile than commodity markets have yet priced. Lebanon's port of Beirut, the primary commercial gateway for a country of 5.4 million people that imports more than 80% of its consumer goods, is operating at approximately 34% of pre-2020 capacity. The 2020 ammonium nitrate explosion destroyed 85% of the port's grain storage capacity. Reconstruction has been chronically stalled. The ceasefire period has not materially accelerated the recovery timeline. According to World Bank assessments published in January 2025, the weekly economic cost of Lebanon's sustained infrastructure deficit, compounded by the security premium that international shipping lines have attached to Beirut-bound cargo, stands at approximately $340 million per week. That figure breaks down as follows. Agricultural import disruption accounts for $95 million per week. Fuel and energy premium pricing adds $78 million per week. Pharmaceutical and medical supply chain restriction contribute $47 million per week. And the residual investor deterrence effect on what remained of the services sector accounts for the remaining $120 million. Those numbers transmit into household budgets through mechanisms that are already visible in Lebanese consumer price data. Food prices have risen 340% in local currency terms since 2019, a figure that substantially understates real consumer impact because the Lebanese pound has itself lost more than 98% of its value against the dollar over the same period. The practical consequence is that a Lebanese family purchasing the equivalent of a standard monthly grocery basket in January 2025 was paying the equivalent of 4.7 times what the same basket cost in January 2021, when measured against actual purchasing power. This is not an abstract macroeconomic statistic. It is a direct mechanism connecting the security environment to the nutritional status of approximately 1.5 million people, whom the World Food Programme has classified as food insecure. The regional energy market is transmitting similar pressure. Eastern Mediterranean gas production from the Karish field, which Israel and Lebanon reached agreement on in October 2022 following US-mediated maritime boundary demarcation, has been operating below nameplate capacity throughout the ceasefire period. Insurance underwriters applying war risk premiums to Eastern Mediterranean extraction infrastructure have increased tariff loading on Karish-associated facilities by between 180 and 240 basis points since October 2023. That premium increase flows directly into the extraction cost structure and ultimately into European energy prices at a moment when the continent remains structurally dependent on non-Russian supply sources. The indirect effect is measurable. European natural gas futures have incorporated a $12 to $18 per megawatt-hour Lebanese front risk premium throughout the first quarter of 2025, according to exchange data compiled by the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. The broader strategic question that emerges from assembling these elements is the one that defense analysts across the regional and Western analytical communities are beginning to articulate with increasing urgency: whether the ceasefire framework in Lebanon is managing a de-escalation arc or simply deferring a reconstitution and resumption cycle that neither the monitoring mechanism nor the underlying political conditions have the structural capacity to prevent. The evidence requires acknowledgement on both sides of this assessment. On the side of managed stability, several meaningful developments have occurred during the ceasefire period. Hezbollah's new leadership, operating under Secretary General Naim Qassem, who assumed formal command following Nasrallah's elimination, has maintained a significantly more cautious public posture than his predecessor, making no declarations that could be interpreted as commitment to resumption timelines. The political formation process in Beirut has, after more than 2 years of presidential vacancy, produced a functioning executive in the form of President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, both of whom have explicitly characterized Hezbollah's military role as incompatible with Lebanese sovereign governance, a formulation unprecedented in its directness from within the Lebanese political system. On the side of reconstitution risk, the operational indicators are considerably more concerning. Iranian resupply operations, the logistical architecture that rebuilt Hezbollah's arsenal following the 2006 war with Israel, have resumed through modified routing that exploits the monitoring framework's jurisdictional gaps. According to verified intelligence assessments reported by multiple regional outlets including Al Monitor and the Jerusalem Post, Iranian military cargo transiting through Syrian territory has reached Lebanese storage sites at a rate estimated at 40 to 60% of the pre-war transfer volume. The terminal descent of that material into Hezbollah's reconstitution pipeline is not intercepted by the Lebanese armed forces' presence south of the Litani because the primary transfer nodes are positioned north of the monitoring zone. The ceasefire geometry, in other words, covers the territory where Hezbollah fires from, but not the territory where it rearms. Israeli military posture tells a parallel story. The Israel Defense Forces have maintained their declaration that they reserve the right to strike reconstitution infrastructure in Lebanon and Syria, regardless of the ceasefire framework's diplomatic status. Between the ceasefire declaration in November 2024 and the end of March 2025, verified strike records compiled from IDF acknowledgement statements, Lebanese civil defense incident logs, and commercial satellite imagery analysis document 34 Israeli strikes in Syrian territory, targeting what IDF statements characterized as Hezbollah-bound weapons transfers. 11 of those strikes occurred within 48 hours of formal US-mediated monitoring sessions, a timing pattern that multiple analysts have noted publicly as unlikely to be coincidental. The structural architecture of deterrence along the Lebanese front is in measurable terms not the same architecture that existed before October 2023. Hezbollah demonstrated during the exchange period that it can sustain fire operations against northern Israel at sufficient volume to displace approximately 80,000 Israeli residents from communities within 4 kilometers of the border. That displacement, which persisted for more than 14 months, generated an estimated $2.8 billion in economic disruption to northern Israeli municipalities, according to Bank of Israel assessments. Israel demonstrated that it can systematically eliminate senior Hezbollah leadership, degrade precision munitions stockpiles through interdiction, and conduct ground operations into southern Lebanon with tactical effectiveness. Both parties have updated their understanding of what the other can and cannot absorb, and both parties are conducting their reconstitution activities in the light of that updated assessment. The monitoring committee, for its part, is operating within a political constraint that limits its effectiveness in ways that its mandate does not acknowledge. The United States, which serves as the primary guarantor of the framework's credibility, has communicated to both Israeli and Lebanese interlocutors through back-channel diplomatic traffic, described to regional journalists by sources with direct knowledge of the exchanges, that Washington's tolerance for a framework collapse is low but not zero, and that the threshold for American intervention to preserve the ceasefire decreases proportionally as Iranian nuclear negotiations progress. That linkage between the Lebanese ceasefire and the broader Iranian diplomatic track means that the stability of the southern Lebanese security environment is in practice a dependent variable of a negotiation process that is itself operating on an uncertain timeline. Here is where the complete picture stands as of the first week of April 2025. The November 2024 ceasefire has formally held for approximately 130 days, while accumulating 214 documented incidents. Hezbollah's reconstitution pipeline is operational at 40 to 60% of pre-war transfer volume. Israeli strike operations in Syria targeting that pipeline have continued at an average of roughly 1 per 4 days. The Lebanese armed forces deployment has not resulted in the dismantlement of verified Hezbollah military infrastructure south of the Litani. The economic cost of the sustained security environment to the Lebanese civilian population exceeds $340 million per week. Eastern Mediterranean energy markets are pricing a persistent $12 to $18 per megawatt-hour risk premium into European natural gas futures. The monitoring framework has referred zero violations to formal review, and the political conditions that would need to exist for a durable resolution. A disarmed Hezbollah, a Lebanese state with genuine sovereign capacity to enforce its own territory, and an Iranian strategic posture that does not require a Lebanese deterrence front do not currently exist and show no measurable trajectory toward existing. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. When the next significant exchange in southern Lebanon reaches the scale that the ceasefire framing can no longer credibly contain, when the reconstitution timeline produces the operational threshold that changes Hezbollah's calculus on resumption, when the Iranian nuclear track produces either resolution or rupture that alters the strategic logic governing all of it, this analysis will be here. Evidence first. What it means for the region and for you always. Before leaving, consider this question in the comments. Given what the 14-month exchange period demonstrated about the limits of both Israeli interdiction and Hezbollah's force projection against defended territory, can the current monitoring framework and the political conditions surrounding it realistically prevent another full-scale escalation cycle, or is the ceasefire structurally functioning as a reconstitution interval that both sides are using to prepare for a conflict neither has the political capacity to formally commit to ending? Every response gets read and considered. This is the analysis.